My name is Keitha, and for several years, I worked as a criminal analyst, and later as a crime scene investigator. I stopped doing that kind of work for a multitude of reasons, but one of them was that, during one of my field investigations, I was followed, tracked, and stalked by a creature that I believe perpetrated the murder I was investigating. This was back in 2015. And while I continued to work for the agency that I had been afterwards, I never went out on another field investigation. Not even when directly asked to. This actually pissed off my boss at the time, because they'd kind of gone out of a limb to give me the job. But after what happened, after what I witnessed firsthand, I just couldn't do it again. I'd rather not reveal the full name of the agency that I worked for, but suffice it to say that it was a sheriff's department in the USA, and it was within and surrounded by a rural farming community, which itself features quite a few heavily wooded areas. It was to one of these forested areas that I'd been sent, along with an entire team of other investigators and detectives. Our task was to look into the most recent in a series of horrifically mutilated cadavers, which had all been found within the same roughly 15-mile radius. The case in and of itself was odd to begin with. None of the victims had any connection with each other outside of living in the area, though there had been one victim who was from out of state and seemed to have been passing through when they were killed. They were also all a mixed bag, being from all walks of life, though the great majority of them were homeless, who accounted for roughly a third of the body count. The bodies started showing up at the beginning of that summer, and at first, it seemed like animal attacks, which wasn't outside the realm of possibility. Bears were common in that area, though they rarely attacked people. But mountain lions were also pressing down from the north every single year, and they did attack people, even unprovoked. This was, however, almost immediately ruled out, because of the bizarre ritualistic manner in which most of the bodies were found. Almost all the victims were found high up in trees, which was part why the team initially suspected mountain lions, but no animal could or would do what was done to these poor people. All 7 corpses had their hearts completely removed from their bodies, and they were hung up in the trees by their intestines. Not only does no animal in North America possess the coordination or the tactile dexterity to maneuver a full-grown adult human in such a way, but the behavior is so far outside the norm for most predators, it's virtually impossible. Now, I had only seen images, pictures of the first 5 crime scenes, but I never visited them at all. I was brought in on the 6th as part of a sort of task force for this specific case, though my boss kept refusing to call us that, both because it would draw attention to the case, but also because most of the staff he brought in for the job were civilian personnel, and not deputies. Now I want to say that at this point, that I am not nor have I ever been a commissioned law enforcement agent. I do not carry a gun, and I didn't have the authority to arrest anyone. I'm also not a scientist, though I do have a degree in psychology. I was, at the time, a civilian criminal analyst, which means that I collected, analyzed, and interpreted data from criminal cases. I also have a pretty good eye for catching details that others seem to miss, and I am possessed of a high level of intelligence. It's important to me that I make the distinction between what I did and what uniformed armed officers face every day. With the exception of this outing and a handful of others, all of my work was done in an office, in front of a computer, or at a table literally viewing physical evidence. It was not a part of my job to be in harm's way, which is part of why I stopped volunteering for these kinds of investigations. We were all volunteers, the civilian staff who had been attached to this case. We'd heard about the brutal, macabre nature of the deaths and knew that the perpetrator will likely not stop unless they were stopped. Now, I can't speak for everyone else, but when the sheriff asked for extra hands, I felt the pull of obligation. We needed to stop this maniac, and fast. Again, I started off at my desk, just working overtime, examining the crime scene photos and other data from different victims. And for me, that was hard enough. They say that you could get used to it. The carnage, I mean. But you don't, and you shouldn't. The minute it stops bothering you, you need to get out of that work for your own sake. I've had to take a lot of time off throughout my entire time with this agency because of how affected I was by some of the things that I saw. It was actually at my computer that I made a pretty important connection with regards to the case. It's a bit technical and is hard to explain, but basically I correlated a pattern connected to the wounds of the second victim with all the others. This meant, essentially, that whatever had been used to kill one victim had been used on all of them. It was something that the team had already suspected, of course, but I found visual, physical evidence that it was true. My discovery was what prompted my boss to ask me if I wanted to volunteer for field work, which I was, even at the time, a little nervous about, but I said yes anyway. Because I'm a team player. This gets me into trouble a lot, because no matter what department you work for, government work always asks a lot, and I always wound up giving. At any rate, I agreed to join the team officially, and my boss kind of vouched for me to get in, which was a big deal and we both knew it. I was kind of on my own best behavior even before we got the call about the sixth body, and kept signing up for more overtime to prove, well, you guessed it, that I was a team player. When we were all called out to the scene, after it had been initially processed, I was at the head of the line, and it was kind of a drag. By then it was August and hotter than shit outside, but I went in with my khakis, my polo shirt, my clipboard and my phone, and navigated this insect-infested jungle to get to the tree where the body was. I bitched under my breath at every wrong step, or slapped away a fly, but my complaining ended the minute we got to the tree, because a chill went straight through me when I saw it. I will never, for as long as I live, ever forget seeing that tree for the first time. It was like I walked back in time to some kind of pagan sacrificial tree. The main trunk and one of the branches was completely covered in blood, and the flies were already at it. I knew when I saw it that the blood would always be on that tree, and it would never not look like someone had been killed on it. It was horrible. We had been instructed not to cross the yellow tape before we had arrived, but we were also told to get as close as we could to get a close look. The department needed a break in this case because the families of the victims were talking about going to the press, which the sheriff obviously didn't really want. So we were encouraged to speak up, show initiative, and think outside the box. One of my fellow civilian investigators asked if any climbing equipment or rope had been found, since the victim had been an adult male of well over 200 pounds. This was a pretty damn salient point, since it would have been difficult to get him up there without such equipment. When my boss simply told her, no, we all kind of looked at each other, silently wondering what that could mean. But no one was brave enough to ask. There was also a discussion between two of the detectives about several gouges in the bark of the tree, which looked like they were made by some kind of three-pronged tool, or a hook. Another of my coworkers pointed out that it also sort of looked like an animal claw, but the silence that responded to her statement let everybody know that it wasn't a favorite avenue of investigation. Though I told her quietly that I agreed with her, and I still do. Remarks were made about blood spatter patterns correlating to the other killings, and how there wasn't any blood outside of the base of the tree, which meant there was nothing to follow. This seemed to indicate that the victim was killed at this location and hauled up into the tree. This led back to conversations about just how he'd gotten up there. We'd been out there for more than an hour and hadn't come up with much at all. And that's when I noticed something. Something really strange. I called out to my boss, who was the under-sheriff, and pointed up into the tree next to the one where the body had been found. There, about 30 or so feet up off the ground, was a splatter of blood on the leaves of a branch. It was so high up that I couldn't even tell if it was actually blood. We half confirmed it with binoculars, and completely confirmed it when my boss called the climbers back in, and got them to go up and collect some of it. Not only were the climbers able to confirm that the blood was human with an immunoassay kit, but while they were up there, they spotted more blood through the higher branches of the trees. It created a very clear trail, which moved from tree to tree, and retreated further into the woods to the west. I remember the climber making a crack about it being Bigfoot, but no one else said a word. It's funny when you're only there for a day, but when you actually have to follow this trail to find out where it ends, well, let's just say I wasn't the only one freaked out about finding a blood trail through the trees. My boss immediately called in the K9 unit to try and follow the trail using one of the branches with blood on it. This right here? See, this is the point where everyone's brains kind of broke. Mine most of all. The minute those dogs got the scent of that blood on their nostrils, they took off to the west for about a minute, stopped by an old oak tree, and just sat down. They literally ignored all the commands to keep tracking and just acted like they found the end of the trail. Right here is also where I should have stopped volunteering to help, but the undersheriff was so proud that I'd found the blood. He asked if I wanted to keep helping to spot the trail in the trees and hopefully follow it. I should have begged to get out because I'd already contributed plenty, and it wasn't like I was going to climb the damn tree. But I was also kind of excited myself. I'd found the break we were looking for, and I had the chance to be front and center. We trekked through those woods and did our best to search for more blood spatter in the trees. We did pretty well too, honestly, but it was already a pretty tall order, so it wasn't surprising that we lost the trail about a quarter mile into the trek. It was also okay though, because all of it was new evidence, and the blood splatter itself might have been able to tell us more. All in all, it had been pretty damn successful. Once the location of the splatters were marked for processing, we all kind of got into a huddle to discuss what had been found, what it might mean, and where to go to next. The idea that a mountain lion was the culprit was put back on the table and felt far more likely at this point, but the behavior was still way too odd for such an animal. Then one of the deputies mentioned that there was an abandoned structure, an old farm nearby, and that the trail may have been headed for it. That was all my boss needed, and he had the deputy lead a group over to the farm to check it out. Everyone was really energized and exuberant at this point, and as cops are wont to do when they sense the end of a rough case, they all began to have tunnel vision. Everyone had a job, and they were doing it. The rest of the civilian investigators headed back to the motorcade. No one had told them to, they just went, but no one told me, so before I knew it, I was standing in the middle of the woods, alone. I admit here freely that I got a bit turned around. I'm not much of the outdoors type, but I also just had no idea where I was, and would already have gotten lost if I hadn't been surrounded by cops up until that point. The other thing was, I kind of wanted to continue to contribute, so I kept half looking for more blood spatter to show someone when they got back. I drifted away from the slight clearing we'd huddled in, as I searched without realizing it, and after only a little while, I was completely lost in those woods, and that was not a good feeling. Every direction looked at once familiar and completely alien, and it wasn't long at all before I started getting pretty damn scared. And this is actually crucial to this experience, because I think my fear was what attracted this thing to me. I have no proof of this, but it felt like my getting afraid almost summoned the damn thing. I heard a snap in the distance, like someone had stepped on a branch a couple of trees away, but I didn't actually worry about it because I thought it was just one of the deputies coming back. But when no one presented themselves after a minute or two, I started getting nervous, and I called out to see if they just didn't know I was there. Once I didn't get any response at all, I immediately started moving with purpose in the direction I thought the motorcade was. I realized as I moved that the snap I'd heard couldn't possibly have been from someone coming back, because it came from an elevated level. It came from the trees. I screamed internally, imagining a cougar jumping from tree to tree as it stalked me, even though I didn't actually think that's what it was. I just kept moving away from the sound and toward what I hoped was safety, because at this point, it was all I could do. I was kind of shocked at the speed with which my situation had changed so suddenly. One minute, I was surrounded by armed protectors and an asset. The next, I was alone in the woods and being chased by God knows what, and I didn't even have a sharpened stick. The whole situation had changed in a matter of moments, and it floored me. Another sound of branches rustled in the canopy above and behind me. It spurred me to move a little faster, and I started to two-step into a little jog. I am not, nor was I then, built for speed or even exercise most of the time, so it wasn't a particularly fast jog, but I was moving. What I wasn't doing, however, was watching my footing, and like an idiot blonde in a horror movie, I tripped over a tree root and fell. I am now and was then middle-aged, and when you're middle-aged and you fall, it's a whole fucking thing. I tumbled forward and landed on my face, smashing my glasses into it. Everything hurt all at once. My knees, my ankle where the root got me, my chest, which slammed into the ground. Everything exploded into pain, suddenly and violently, but I didn't give myself time to dwell on it. I panicked as soon as I fell, and immediately tried to power through the pain to get to at least a sitting position. I wasn't just worried about whatever was behind me. It was the dead middle of summer, and there were all kinds of critters, both venomous and not, that could and would bite the hell out of me, and I didn't want to tangle with any of them either. I managed to get to my feet pretty quickly, all things considered, and I grabbed my clipboard from the ground where I dropped it. When my eyes came up from my immediate predicament to scan the trees behind me, I froze immediately when I spotted movement in the upper branches of a birch tree, not 50 feet away. A roughly human-looking figure hung from a lower branch with one appendage, the other hanging down below it, almost lackadaisically. It was pale gray, but the way the light hit it, it almost looked tan through the foliage. It was almost like it had some kind of camouflage, but what I made out most clearly were the pair of dark, beady eyes which stared down at me blankly. Those eyes, I could tell, did not see something they were curious about. No, they saw prey. It was like looking at a spider about to grab at something in its web. I just stared at it for what felt like a long time because it felt like it was all that I could do. As I examined it, I noted that the appendage which hung down so lazily had 3 digits, each which ended in a sharp nail. All I could think of was one of those claws plunging into my chest and tearing out my heart. I began to slowly back away from the area and continued toward what I hoped was the motorcade and the rest of my team, but I started to feel like I had no idea where I was, and that I was going in the wrong direction. I had no choice though, because my only other options were more unfamiliar forest or whatever the living hell this thing was. I moved methodically away from the area, and this time spared some attention to keep an eye out which direction I was going. I could hear this thing scrambling through the trees, following me, but I tried to push it from my mind. I had to get to someone, anyone. I knew somehow that if I wasn't alone, I'd be okay. And the instant this thought came into my head, I heard, clear as day, my husband's voice call my name from behind me. I paused, but I didn't look around. My husband Nate was a part of the department I worked for, but he was definitely not a part of this investigation, as he worked in a different division. So there was no way in hell he was out there, unless there was some kind of emergency. But even then, someone else would have come and found me to tell me what was going on. Not Nate. My husband's voice came again, from only a little ways from behind me. But again, I did not turn around. Instead, I continued to move in the direction I'd been going, and didn't acknowledge the sound at all. I made it another 20 feet or so before I heard Nate call my name again. At this point, I was a little pissed because I knew it wasn't him. Just by the way the voice was saying my name, it was like he was asking if it was my name, like he wasn't sure. Not at all as though he knew it and had said it 1,000 times. Unfortunately, my anger was outpaced heavily by the absolute terror that pierced my chest just then. Just as I was about to say screw it and break into a run, I heard another familiar voice call out to me, as though looking for me. It was my boss, and it was coming from a completely different direction than where I was headed. I immediately called out to him and pivoted mid-stride to head in that direction. We called back and forth to each other for a bit, and I eventually saw him through a pair of trees and shouted to him in relief. From behind me, I didn't hear a single sound further, but I just knew that whatever that thing was, it was still around. I told my boss that I'd gotten lost on my way back to the motorcade, and he just took me back. He explained that he'd been looking for me because he wanted to ask me about some gouges they'd found at the farmhouse, which he thought were similar to the ones that had been in the tree. When we finally got back to where there was an abundance of people, my boss showed me a picture he'd taken of the gouges, and I knew instantly that both these and the ones we'd seen before were made by the creature I saw. Just eyeballing it, I could tell that the thing's nails were a close match to them. I didn't say a damn thing to the undersheriff though, because I know exactly how he would have reacted, and then it would have gotten out, and I'd be called Crazy Creature Keitha. No thank you. No sir. I spent the rest of that outing hovering near our transport, and didn't calm down until I saw a gas station 5 miles from the crime scene, and felt like I was back in civilization. In truth, I didn't really fully calm down until I was back with Nate later that evening. He knew something was wrong the minute he saw me, but didn't say anything because I looked so rattled. It took me a while to actually come out and tell him about it, but I eventually did, and I was surprised at how receptive he was to it. He told me he'd seen some strange things before transferring to his current division that he'd never told me about. But most importantly, he told me that he believed me. Until writing this, he was the only other soul alive who knew. As for the case, it dried up pretty damn quick. We of course never caught anyone, but the killings also stopped abruptly. It was like the investigation had disrupted this thing's ritual or whatever. Like it knew it couldn't continue, so it just left to start over again somewhere else. It all just kind of went away, and only one of the families pressed the issue. In the end, it was chalked up to animal attacks, just because no other explanation fit. The nature of the creature weighed on my mind, and it still does. Was it some kind of alien, or what they would call a cryptid? I didn't know that word very well until after this experience, when I became very familiar with it. Nate as well. I don't think it was just a creature myself. It felt, in a word, evil. I've worked on a couple of really nasty homicide cases before, but only one had the same energy as that creature, and it was a serial killer. And I think that it was a demon, and I get panic attacks every time I think about what might have happened that day.